é um aluno. Bom, boa tarde a todos e todas. É um prazer estar aqui com vocês. Nós iremos hoje receber o professor Andreas Matrazarakis, que vai nos falar sobre aspectos do bioclima para o planejamento, né, na era de mudanças climáticas. Bastante importante, interessante. Aqui na fala, a gente agradece muito ao professor Andreas pela presença. Agradeço também à professora Lloyd pela organização do evento. E agradeço vocês aqui por estar nos acompanhando e também o pessoal que está acompanhando por transmissão online. Obrigado, é um prazer. Bem-vindos. Boa palestra para todos nós.
Boa tarde a todos. Eu vou apresentar o professor Andreas Matrazarakis, ele que foi meu supervisor de doutorado sanduíche na Alemanha. Ele nasceu na Grécia, ele estudou meteorologia na Ludwig-Maximilian Universität Munique. Ele completou uma dissertação sobre o bioclima da Grécia em 1995, na Universidade Aristóteles, em Tessalônica. Entre meteorologia e entre os anos de 1995 e 2001, foi assistente de pesquisa do Instituto de Meteorologia da Universidade de Freiburg. Ele escreveu a habilitação sobre o componente térmico do clima urbano. Posteriormente, de 2001 a 2015, ele foi pesquisador associado sênior da Universidade, pesquisador e professor sênior da Universidade de Freiburg, foi nomeado como professor adjunto em outubro de 2006. Desde agosto de 2015, é chefe do Centro de Pesquisa de Biometeorologia Urbana do Serviço de Meteorologia Alemão. Entre os anos de 1996 e 2014, presidiu a Comissão de Clima, Turismo e Recreação na Sociedade Internacional de Biometeorologia. Foi vice-presidente da Sociedade Internacional de Biometeorologia entre 2006 e 2009. Desde 2016, é presidente da Sociedade Alemã para Avanço de Pesquisa sobre Medicina e Meteorologia. Ele vai fazer agora a palestra, eu passo a palavra para o Andreas. You can talk. Não haverá tradução simultânea. Tá.
Okay. Thank you very much for having the possibility to be today here. It's a pleasure to talk to all of you. It's not my characteristic that I usually have titles which are so long. But in this case, I had to perform it in that way. You see a long title here, but in reality, there are three specific issues that I would like to exchange myself with you, which is the one is about the urban climate, the relation of the urban climate to that what people who live in cities require or need. And the other one is how can we apply these results or this information that we provide, especially in the area in climate change. And also one of my focus or one of my targets today is also to give you some, let me say, some small examples or explanations why climate change is one, let me say, of the biggest challenges, maybe the biggest challenge that we have or we are facing and we will have, of course, in the future. Climate change is one of the factors that we have who it's now clear that it's not, when we talk about climate change, in reality, we have to be more specific in the term climate change, it has to be called anthropogenic climate change. That means this is because of the humans affect the climate. This is because we put too many CO2 gas, too many greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We have 5 facts at the moment. And since the beginning of the IPCC, which was more than 30 years ago, the facts have been more specific, more clear. And at the moment we know very detailed, but it reminds me to a song that I know from the 80s and the 90s, not everything must change, everything is changing. And we can really express in these 5 topics and say it's real, climate change. We see that in our records. We see in not only in the long-term perspective, but also in daily life when we are exposed to a heat wave. It's us. That means it's absolutely clear. And we know that the recent General Secretary of the UN and the last one has stated that climate change is one of the biggest challenges that we will face. It's bad. There's nothing good in climate change. There are also some positive aspects, but I think the negative aspect is much more. And all the experts at the moment, I would say it's more than 90% agree, but there is hope. That means we can do something. It's less meaningful to talk only about climate change as something bad, but what can we do against it? And in climate change, we have not only the change as we show in the previous graph, that you have an increase of high temperature, we have a modification and change in the extremes. And if we look on the extremes that we are facing, or which are most important, and this is this extremes that we have with the highest scientific evidence, we see, and you see in the size here of the circles that we have here, the biggest one is the extreme precipitation event, the coastal flooding, but also the heat waves. Of course, I cannot focus on everything of that. So I will focus on heat, because heat is something not extraordinary, but it's something that we can easy and fast manage. And there are also some facts about heat, but before I will talk about the facts about heat and the possibilities that we have to let me say, beat the heat, we have to know that there are some specific things. It's not secrets, it's reality, and these are the cities. Cities, and at the moment are living in the cities more than 50% of the world population. In Germany, especially, it's more than 70, it's 75. And this is a fact that we have. The second fact that we have is that more than 75% of the CO2 emission take place in cities. So in reality, we can talk and say, okay, climate change is a problem of urban areas. And the third one, and the third fact that we have of course more facts. I'm presenting only 3 or 4 facts. Only 3% of the surface of the earth is cities. That means we have a huge and incredible concentration of the emissions in urban areas. We have also the problems in the biggest problems in the urban areas. On the other side, when we talk about the urban areas, we know that usually urban areas are about 2 to 3 centigrade in the annual term, on the annual mean, warmer than the surroundings. This is one fact. The second fact is that we expect to the end of the century on the global level an increase of about 3 centigrade. Can you run the connection now? It's about the same amount cities, what we expect in the future. But we can explain this or see this from another perspective and see here and say people living in urban areas experiencing right now climate change. But there is also another secret behind that in the future we will have 2 climate changes, the one in cities and the real one, what people are facing, especially the population in the cities. in order to understand that, we have to know why cities are warming and how can we not only mitigate climate change in cities, but how can we adapt on that? Because first we have adaptation, and then we have at the same time mitigation, but in adaptation we can run much quicker. So there are some differences between cities and rural areas. First of all, a rural area is two-dimensional. Of course, forests are also two-dimensional, but we leave this behind or by side. Okay, cities are three-dimensional, and we have buildings and vegetation in urban areas. This first of all, we have the complexity in an urban area. We were talking before starting the presentation. In reality, our urban areas something like hills, but there are very, very complex hills and so on. And bringing all these factors together, we have now some specific features and characteristics in urban areas. The first of these characteristics is the morphology. It's not a secret. We have more surfaces in an urban area. We don't see the sky because we have a less free horizon because of the buildings and the other obstacles that we have. That means we have here a radiation capture, and we have less wind because buildings and other obstacles have roughness, and we have lower reflectance because in an urban canyon we have multiple reflection, and that means finally we have less reflection. This is the first one. The second one is the air pollutants. We have higher radiation because we have more pollutants. We have change of the atmospheric composition. It's not so directly connected to urban climate, but directly connected to climate change. And then we have heat emission. And the heat emission is coming from heat, but coming also from cooling. We have burning processes, but we have also air pollution. And then we have a fourth factor, which is the building materials and the surfaces. These building materials, they have a heat storage. They have a higher heat capacity, but materials have no evaporation because there's no green, and there are possibilities how to modify. This perspective, what I'm showing here, is from the point of view of energetic aspects. That means based on physical properties. To be honest, I'm not so much interested in that. I'm interested in something different. My topic is a little different because I want to know what is in an urban area, all the modifications and changes that we have, how they affect my target, and my target is the human. I want to know how is the effect, or what is the effect of the modification in urban areas or in general of global climate change on the human health. So we have several factors that we have to consider here. This is the summary of my introduction, which I will, of course, show later in the end. We have climate change. Most of the climate change takes place in urban areas. We have urban climate, but we have also people who are living in urban areas, which affects their health. And then we have heat. Shown before, heat is one of the biggest targets. Why is heat one of the biggest targets? Because it affects daily life. It affects not only urban configuration and the urban constructions that we have, but it affects also quality of life, morbidity, mortality. We know that during heat we have an increase in mortality. In reality, we don't want to know the mortality. We want to know what is before the mortality. And then we know all these effects, and we have several actions and movements at the moment. One of the biggest that we have is the Global Heat Health Information Network, which is a combination or cooperation between WHO and WMO, which is the World Meteorological Organization. And the focus on the Global Heat Health Information Network is the heat in the city. Why the heat is so warm, and what can we do? The second one is the heat on workplace, because people are working in urban areas, outdoors, but also indoors. And the third one is what happens about the people when they have free time, when they are exposed in the sun. This is something that we mostly forget. That means we are exposed to heat, and how can we quantify? And at the moment, the Global Heat Health Information Network is focusing on indoor conditions. Have you thought about that? How many time of the day you spend indoors? In winter, it's more than 85%, and in summer, it's also more than 70%. That means we need to know what happens indoors. I will show you later on some examples of how to quantify heat, how to quantify the effect on the human body. We know that there is no one parameter, not only one parameter who affects that. At the moment, we have an air temperature here about, I assume, about 20 centigrade. If we will increase the air movement here, you will not feel about 20, you will feel about 17 or 18. That means we know that we have same effective complexes or effective, in a summary, effective ways. And this we try to combine. First of all, when we want to combine heat and cold, we have not only air temperature, we have also humidity, we have wind, we have also radiation, but we are human and we have something like individuality. And we produce by our own energy. And if we lose many energy, we take some actions like wearing more or doing some other things. And we try to calculate this because we cannot ask all the people how you feel today in terms of the temperature. We simulate or we calculate and see the human body as an engine who is producing energy and exchanging energy. This is something on the physical basis, on the thermophysiological basis. We consider also thermophysiology like activity in clothing, and we provide something like a real field temperature. This real field temperature is valid indoors and also outdoors. How we do that? We classify this in terms of classes. If I ask you now, what is the temperature that you prefer at the moment, you will say something about 17 to 25 at the moment. There is a seasonal variation. We know all about that. This is not the problem, but we can summarize this in one temperature. In reality, we have about 70 parameters who affect the human thermal perception. What we are doing with the thermal indices, we call them equivalent temperatures. And these equivalent temperatures, we call them also modern thermal indices, and all of them, this is not a secret, require the same input parameters to be calculated. And here I'm presenting only the physiologically equivalent temperature because most of the studies that we have are based on the physiological equivalent temperature in short-term PET. We calculate for someone who is exposed to meteorological conditions outside, we calculate the core temperature, skin temperature, sweating, and some other parameters. And then we look and transfer these results to an indoor and see at what temperature we have the same exposure, the same temperatures, core temperature, skin temperature indoors, and then we provide an equivalent temperature. And from these equivalent temperatures, we have, as I mentioned before, also thermophysiology is it's valid in typical indoor environment, but described with the conditions outdoor. And this is a model. This is not a simple formula. This is a model. This is not a simple formula, 0.7 temperature, 0.2 wind, and so on. It's a complex approach. And then we have classes of exposure because we combine here psychology, we combine here thermophysiology, but also the physical components like the human energy balance in order to modify that, in order to adjust that. And this is not also a secret that when we have more than 35 and more than 30, everyone is suffering because of heat. And we see, especially in the mild climate regions like Europe, mostly Europe, we see that when we have PET higher than 35, an increase in the heat-related mortality. This is not a secret. And there are many studies about that, about the thermal indices. We have a lot of them. And there has been a paper with one of my PhD students. The PhD student finished his PhD when he was 69 years old. Now he's 76 or 77. And he summarized all these conditions for a guideline for the engineers. And we find out that from the 160 or 70 indices that we have, a good approach in order to quantify them in a thermophysiological manner in a human health exposure with heat and cold. There are only 4 or 5 indices which can be applied. And all indices can be easily calculated when you have the required input parameters. Okay, what do you need in order to calculate? You need something like that, which is, we call a complex thing. We don't have a name for that. And you see measurement of temperature, humidity, wind, but also you see radiation in a very easy way, which is the globe temperature. But in order to run really radiation, you need 3-dimensional, the shortwave and long-wave radiation environment. That means the solar, but also the terrestrial one. And you see in reality here, 12 sensors for radiation. Of course, this is very difficult to do that and also very expensive. And of course, you cannot leave this station for a long time in a park because you know what will be happen. And a similar approach, if you want to have something which is moving here and you see the name here, maybe it's not good readable, zero emission Mercedes. If you want to be in the parks and so on, but you need here a lot of manpower, mostly students, and students will not follow more than 3 days, day and night measurements. These are the possibilities that we have in order to get the data. But we have also some other possibilities concerning the data, which is the modeling. We have very good microscale models, which can be applied in order to have these models and provide information. That means a combination between measurement or existing data sets. The data sets can be also modeled from weather forecast or reanalysis data, but also for regional climate simulation can be applied. One of these models is a Raman model. And from these 4 models that I show you here, 2 of these models have been developed by our labs in Freiburg. It's a free available software. It can be run in order to run all this analysis. So we have climate change, we have daily modification of weather, but we have also methods that we can apply. And I bring with me today for you 4 presents. The first present is about something popular. It's about popular events. It's about the Olympic Games and about FIFA 22. I would like to tell you the story because when we have a popular event, we don't have only the athletes. We have also the organizers, the staff there, but we have also the spectators. And we make an analysis in the past that was about 8 years ago. And we analyzed the conditions for the FIFA Games in Qatar, which was planned in the summer 22. I'm sorry that this picture is about Argentina, but it has no meaning, that it doesn't mean that they will win. I hope that the final will be Greece and Brazil. I'm not sure about that. Okay, we make this analysis. We didn't make this analysis for the athletes. We make the art for the fans. And I will show you the results of the analysis. But before, I would like to mention that all this information went to the media, especially to the big media. You see here an example from LA Times. And the headline was "Scientific Proof that a Summer World Cup in Doha is too hot for fans." What have we done? We analyzed the conditions. You see on the right side, the 2 graphs is the temperature. On the left side is temperature. On the right side is physiologically equivalent temperature, the real field temperature, what in reality the people feel there. And we analyze the conditions not in monthly resolution, and it is not monthly mean conditions, is an analysis that we provide for separating the months in 3 parts, but having all the day, that means on hourly data. And then we find out that in terms of temperature, we have in summer not the best conditions. In terms of the time of the day, we see that during the day when the games was planned, it's too hot. And then we look or give focus on the PET, and we see that PET was higher, about 10 to 15 centigrade than air temperature. And our suggestion was transfer the games to the winter. Nothing happened. We went through the media. And then we have been contacted by the organizers, and the organizers make a statement: counterpoint, cooling open air sport venues is not science fiction. That means we have here the example: science is telling the one thing, but the other thing, or the other side, is saying contra in reality. And in order to keep the story short, our suggestion was winter. The contra, we can cool everything. It was in the scientific society, no understanding for the contra, and so on. And 6 months after this paper, and because also of other reasons, we didn't have the reason in order to shift the games. Now in winter, we will have this year the games in winter. That was 2014. And we had diverse reactions and perceptions. This is a good example where we can take science in order to see that finally we have been successful. It means we can move with something practical, which is for the human health or for the humans practical. But the story goes on. 2019 was the World Athletics in Doha. That was the first event in Doha had also outdoor sports or activities. And maybe you remember that kind of pictures. 40% of the women marathon didn't start and 30% collapsed. I was there together with the World Athletics, and we have been alarmed. Also, the World Athletics have been alarmed. And finally, there was no winner there. There was only losers and so on. And the question of the World Athletics was, how will we in Tokyo 1 year later? And then we analyze all these things, and then we compare the conditions that we made for Doha. We put also more information about the tourism information, recreation, and so on. And then we analyze again the similar conditions, and we find out that, of course, Tokyo in summer running athletics and 50-kilometer walking is not the best solution. And then the International Olympic Committee shifted the outer, let me say, stressful games like marathon and 50-kilometer walking to Sapporo. This is also the one story continued to the next, and then there was really something that what we can call successful science and so on. The second example, what I have here, which is more related to architecture, is the environmental pressure. We have in Freiburg a very popular space, and 2008, for this space, the city or the municipality want to reconstruct this area because this place don't belongs to the university, belongs to the municipality. And there was a huge discussion in the newspaper, in the social media, and the public, in all, let me say, in daily life. And they said a very hot pavement, it's like a back oven when it will be modified in that way. You will see now why I'm talking about. And there was a huge environmental pressure from NGOs, from regular people, for people who have some influence in the city and so on. This is the original place. This was a green area. It's surrounded by the colleges of the university, by the theater and the university library and so on. And this was the planning of the architect. Remove trees. In reality, in this place was 22 adult trees. They want to remove most of the trees, and they want to have a multifunctional space. And this space has to be easy to clean, easy to maintain, and so on, used for, let me say, for concerts and so on. People have a personal relationship to this place because they are passing by, going to the city by foot or by tram and so on. And then there was some simulation, some consulting about how will be the conditions there. There was some simulations with microscale models, but we, as scientists and people from the topic, didn't agree with that kind of simulations. And then the newspaper, one of the biggest newspaper, there's only one big newspaper in Freiburg, they make a combination between the new situation and the old situation. And they recommend this. Finally, it has been reconstructed. Nobody knew how it will be. The place is called the place of the old synagogue. It's very frequently used. Modifications has been, there is also many green and blue, that means also water is there, something like a fontaine, and also possibility to cool the surfaces. But the amount of the trees at the moment is the same like before. Some trees have been cutted, but some trees have disappeared. What happened here? We make a simulation. And then after we making the simulation, we publish like Doha in a good journal. And we made one simple simulation. There was in a specific area, it was in the east side of the place, where was a tree close to the bus station. At that time was passing the bus there. The tree was about 11 meters high, about radius of the crown about 7 meters. This tree disappeared. We knew that it will disappear, this tree, because the tram has to pass there. And then we make a simulation. And in this simulation, we simulate the amount of hours with PET over 35. I showed you before, PET over 35 means heat stress. We find out that the amount of hours increases from 205 hours to 330. It was simulation for 10 years that we made with models that we had. We combined here Raymond and Sky Helios, and 125 hours, it's not 5 days, it's more, because we have all the hours of the day. That means it's about 15 days more. And this shocked the people as well as administration. That was our participation or our contribution to this topic. In reality, we have been quiet, we provide only the results. The space has been reconstructed. At the moment, I can summarize for this space and say environmental pressure makes sense. We expect in reality something, but finally it's different. I have to tell you the story that 3 days after the opening of this place, one of the tree was damaged. Part of the tree was damaged by the storm. We forgot to include the wind in the analysis. And humans adapt and adjust after a specific time. If you ask now the people, do you remember the place how it was before? I have to be honest, it wasn't so aesthetical in the past. Yeah. And finally, both sides are happy, or mostly happy. And the story goes on. People ask me, Andreas, how the situation will continue? Of course, we are planting mammoth trees, we are planting shade shelters there, and so on, in order to see what happens. I think one day they will modify the plates in something more spectacular. I have to mention that under this area, there is a garage, a parking area, and so on. That you don't have so many possibilities of old trees. This is also a wonderful example to show that. My third example is about trees. What is the effect of the trees? I showed you before in place of the old synagogue, there's 125 hours. But when we talk about trees, we have to consider more factors, not only one factor about temperature or PET and so on. If we look on the positive and negative aspects of trees, we see for the green color, the positive aspects, we have some red colors, which is maybe not so positive, but I would like to provide you some more numbers about the effect of shade. 2003, we had a very huge heat wave in Europe. In all Europe died, in addition, 60,000 people in the summer. And at that time, we had a question from Bavaria. And Bavaria is in the situation that they have stations, climate stations, or forest climate stations in the forest and outside of the forest, or close, they are close together. And we made the analysis for the first 2 weeks of August. And we look on the situation about the temperature inside the forest and outside the forest. Outside the forest is the left graph, inside the forest is the right graph here. And if you compare both of them, you don't see much difference. The difference is about 2 to 3 centigrade. That is in terms of air temperature. But if you look now to the PET, the difference is much higher. This is a clear statement for the people about urban forestry, about urban trees, what the effect can be during heat waves. You can reduce that. I show you two examples or three examples. One is about the short term. The other one is about the long. I show you the example about the long term in reality, because it's trees, is about the human effect when they are exposed in the sun and so on. What can we do now against it? What is the actions that we can take? And I would like to talk with you about the warning system and the actions that we have from the perspective of the law. And you have here an example. We have warning systems. I would like to show you the example of heat warnings that we have in Germany. We have the weather forecast. We have a model like PET. This is different. There is not much difference between perceived temperature and PET, especially for heat and so on. And we know that a heat wave which occurs and in the beginning of the summer is more stressful and effective for the people, that means negative effects and so on, than in the end of the summer. And this we calculate by the weather forecast. And I mentioned in my beginning about GIN, about the Global Heat Health Information Network, that most of the people spend their time indoors. We calculate also with a model the conditions indoors, especially in elderly houses. And then we get a warning proposal. This warning proposal is modified and approved by our biometeorologists in our lab. Then we get the warnings on county level. And then we have the possibility to provide these warnings to the ministries, to the health authorities. We have administration agreements with all the federal states of Germany, but also for the nursing homes, also for the elderly homes, but also for the public. This we provide not only for the day situation outside, indoor situation, but in addition for the urban areas. That means we include also the urban heat island, but also elderly people, because elderly people perceive hot conditions later, but extreme hot much earlier than ordinary people. And then, of course, we have to communicate them. And we communicate this in a different ways, but the communication aspect of the warnings is not our job, because we are providing only the warnings. And the regular, not the regular, but from the perspective of administration, of legislation and law, we have on the, let me say, on the international level, the heat action plans. This started again from WHO, and in the heat action plans, they have been released about 2008, if I remember well. They have 8 factors. First of all, I would like to show you that one of these factors I have presented to you is number 2. It's a precise heat health warning system. And then I provide you information about urban planning and construction, how we can do cutbacking, what can we do, what kind of examples we have in terms of trees, in terms of modification of places, and so on. One other factor is the indoor conditions. At the moment, as I mentioned, most of the people are working on the indoor factors, and all the other factors that you see here is more for administration, especially the first one, which is the cooperation in the central coordination. I would like to ask you, what do you think as architects, who has to coordinate the heat action plans? We can discuss this later. And then we have the actions to be taken. That means we take measures, what can be done, but we need also not measures for in general, but also for the vulnerable and risk groups, population groups, but we need also education. And finally, we need also the monitoring and evaluation of it. I would like to summarize again the topic about urban bioclimate. I started with urban climate, with climate change, and I mentioned also mitigation and adaptation, and we need the actions. And the actions that we are taking has to be in the short term and the long term. I show you several examples of that, but we need also not qualitative information, but also quantitative, how much a tree can reduce heat. This is one point. The other point is the communication. All this information has to be communicated. All these warnings has to be communicated. And there is also something that we can consider here is that, and I would like to show you an example. This is from a lady who is working on the urban planning department. And she made several years ago a presentation in our lab, and she presented her view to us. And she talked about shade, we talk about radiation. She talked about ventilation, we talk about wind. She talked about cold air production, but it was the only term that we have. We talk about in climatology about cold air flow, not production, and so on. In reality, we talk about the same things, but with different terminology. And then we have the communication possibilities. This is exactly the picture that I didn't explain 3 transparencies before. We need a multifaceted communication, a multifaceted transfer of information, which finally have to be there where it's needed, there where a decision has to be made, and there where protection takes place. That means for elderly people, for ill people, especially, but also for people who decide about that. It starts from the authorities, goes to doctors and pharmacies, to risk groups. And one of my best term, which I like to use, is the neighbor health. That means protect about your people who are close to you and so on, but also your neighbors and so on. I would like to summarize. We need actions. And we have a very good instrument here, which are the heat action plans. We have short-term actions, which is the heat health warning system. In general, we need early warning systems in cooperation with all the responsible people, health sector, energy sector, and so on. And on the long term, we need everyone, starting from urban planning, architecture, and so on. And of course, we need communication and we need the education. I would like to close my presentation with one of my favorite writers that we have. It's a Greek one. And he has written several books. There are several movies made from him. We will talk later about that. I think it's not needed here to talk about movies. And he has written this slogan here, which I like at most. And thank you very much in my original language, Efestopoli.
So much. Thank you so much, Professor Matrazarakis. And now we have some questions. Someone want to make a question? Alguém quer fazer uma pergunta? No chat tem alguém? Tá. Okay. But I have a question for you. When you're talking about
First of all, I have to run the most important strategy against heat, which is drinking water.
Good. You're talking about heating, and I would like to explain about how heating is a problem or not a problem in urban climate change.
Heating is required, let me say, in northern latitudes, especially in winter. Yeah, heating is required in northern latitudes. That means if you take Mediterranean, which is much more northern, you have to heat indoor during winter. If you take Germany, you need heat from October to April. They have central heating, they have heating devices, but if you go more to the Mediterranean or more to the tropics, you don't have heat. Here you need cooling. And the cooling can be done, can be performed by several ways. Can be natural cooling, can be also natural ventilation, but most of the time we need air conditioning. Air conditioning is nothing bad, but we have to think how air conditioning is working. Air conditioning is cooling the air in a room, but the heating in a room is not coming from the air in the room, but it's coming from the surrounding, coming from the windows and from the wall. And in order to cool the air indoors, we need energy. This energy, when it's produced, releases CO2 mostly, which is part of the emissions. This is the one point. The other point is that cooling, we have also the exhaust of warm air in order to cool the indoor, which is released outdoor. That means I'm increasing the urban heat on. And this is the problem that we have. In the tropics, you can cool that. In Europe, in many areas, we don't have air conditioning. We have natural cooling and so on, and we try to avoid. This is a problem. At the moment, for Germany, as far as I know, it's about 70% heating and 30% cooling. In the tropics, it's about 70%, 80%, maybe more. The energy that you use for cooling.
Another question that I would give is about adaptation and mitigation of the urban climate. We know that this concept is different, but I would like to explain how is the different, because we have strategies. It's short in another. It's for a long time.
The point is that when we try to modify conditions in the urban area or protect people, we cannot separate between mitigation and adaptation. When I'm talking about an early warning system, it's clear adaptation. But when I'm talking about cooling centers and so on, which is based on renewable energy and so on, is mitigation. So we cannot separate. But finally, the result is that we need the actions. We focus mostly on the acute situation, that means on the short term, because when we decrease the emission of CO2, we will see the effect in 50 to 60 years, maybe longer. This is the reason, because we have both actions as mitigation and adaptation have to run at the same time. But adaptation effect you see direct. It means if you have a tree which mitigates also CO2, but also reduces radiation in order to be in the shade, you see that directly. The same is also when we take actions during heat, that you change your behavior and so on, or you have early warning system. There is no clear separation, but both is important. We focus more on adaptation because we see the reaction, or we see the result of adaptation right directly.
And another question is about communication. We know that architects have a serious problem to input meteorological data in the analysis, the urban planning issues. So I would like to know about some good strategies to talk about this. I know when we input a health data, and I would like to know if we put health data and join with urban planning, it's maybe it could be a good direction.
Yeah, several aspects in that. First of all, you need a common language. You have to understand that wind is wind. You have to understand that shade is shade. Starting about bioclimatic architecture is absolutely different about the bioclimate that I'm using. Yeah, so we have to be clear. First of all, we need a round table to find the common language and the common things that we have. And then we have to include there not only architects, planners, but also the health sector, the energy sector, forestry, maintenance, maybe economy, and also the social factors. Then find a solution. The best example that we have is the heat action plan. If you see on point number 1 is central coordination and responsibility. In reality, heat action plans have been made for the medicine sector, but the groups that are using most of the heat action plans is from urban planning and construction. because we need all these groups in order to be together. And of course, I forgot one group. This is the epidemiologists, because they have the health data. We find out, or we run analysis with the epidemiological sector. Nowadays, the future will be easier because of all the experience with the pandemic, and we make the analysis much faster. We get the data much faster, and this has to be communicated. But when you communicate, let me say something bad, like people are dying, you have to provide also a solution or suggest a solution, recommendation what to do. Makes no sense to say only everything is bad, but we need something where we can find a possibility to solve the problem or have a solution.
Any questions? Pergunta? Cláudia Andrade, SBU. How do any tests compare traditional architectural materials and contemporary construction materials and their contribution to heating?
Didn't get the question. Can you?
It's about
Which one?
so Cláudia.
Have you done any tests comparing the architectural material and contemporary construction material? Yes. Thank you very much for the question. We are not working in the scale of building physics and so on. We are working from outdoor more, but there are several studies about the construction. We have at the moment huge movements and many groups worldwide working in that. But we have to be careful from region to region about these materials that we use. We have to consider not only temperature, not only reflection of radiation, but also maybe more factors about humidity, but also wind and so on. Yeah.
And Leonora Assis, Leonora, is taking. Sorry, it's very long. Thank you for the inspiration lecture, Professor. I would like to know if we have developed model to consider very low ratio. We are using it in informal areas in Belo Horizonte. BH, Belo Horizonte.
Yeah, Eleonora, thank you for your question. Yes, in Raman, we still have bone ratio. We will not continue to develop Raman, not much. We will focus more on Sky Helios, but including artificial intelligence, which will make in future, let me say, the calculations much faster. Yeah, but we are using what is
BH Belo Horizonte.
Okay, Belo Horizonte. Okay. Thank you for the question. Looking forward to meet you. There's another question.
Another question. It's just thank you for presentation. Eu gostaria de agradecer a presença de vocês aqui. Como não temos mais perguntas, vamos encerrar. I would like to thank you for this inspiration lecture. It was very nice, and I think will clear the mind of a lot of architecture, urban design, urban planning here, the future urban planning that we have. Thank you so much.
I have to thank you for giving me the possibility to talk. Thank you very much.
Huh? Yeah.
How many attempts? How many in the system? Oh, 147.